Dear students, welcome you to session 2 video of Cost and Management Accounting 4th semester BCom of Mangalore University. In this session, let us understand the different steps involved in overheads accounting. The different steps are: the first one, the collection of overheads. Then the collected overheads are classified and codification is done. So classification and codification of overheads. Then the allocation and apportionment of overheads. After that, reapportionment of service department cost to production department, and finally the absorption of overheads by production units. Now these are the steps involved in overheads accounting, and actually these are the first 3 chapters which we are going to study. That is, the first chapter overheads, the second chapter secondary distribution of overheads, and the third chapter absorption of overheads. Now let us first see the first step involved in overhead accounting, that is the collection of overheads. Now we need to get information about the indirect cost. So overheads is nothing but the sum total or aggregate of indirect materials, indirect labor and indirect expenses. Now from various sources we get information about these indirect cost incurred by the organization. The first one is the stores requisition notes, which helps us in finding out about the indirect materials which is issued from the stores. Now similarly, wage analysis sheet gives us information about the wages paid to the indirect workers. And then the cash book gives us information about all other expenses which are paid in cash. And then we have the subsidiary books which are maintained in the organization, which helps us to find out non-cash items like depreciation or interest on capital, etc., which are incurred in the organization. So the first step involved is to collect the information about the overheads incurred during a particular period. So how do we collect? We collect the information from the various sources like the stores requisition notes, wage analysis sheets, or cash books, or even the purchase vouchers, in order to find out the information about the materials, and as well as the different subsidiary books which are maintained in the organization. Once the information about these overheads are collected, the second step involved is the classification and the codification of overheads. Now we will see what is the meaning of classification and how classification of overheads can be done. Classification, we know, is the process of grouping the cost according to their common characteristics. Now what we do is we group the various items of overheads into distinct groups on the basis of some common characteristics. So how do we do this? There are different bases of classification. So classification based on function, classification of overheads based on nature or elements, or classification based on behavior. So the different ways in which classification can be made, or the methods of classification, are the function wise classification, the element wise classification, and the behavior wise classification. Now let us see the first aspect, that is the classification of overheads on the basis of function, or the function wise classification of the overheads. When the overheads are grouped with reference to a major activity, divisions of an organization, it becomes a functional classification. So mainly we classify it as the factory or production or manufacturing overheads, then the office or administrative overheads, selling overheads, and the distribution overheads. Now factory overheads, what is this? These are the indirect expenses of operating the manufacturing division of a concern. It covers all indirect expenditure incurred by the undertaking from the receipt of the order until the completion of the products and the final goods for that matter. Now for example, the rent of the factory, the depreciation on factory building, the fuel and power charges, the lighting and heating, salary of work manager, wages of foreman, remuneration of inspecting staff, storekeeping expenses, contribution to ESI, provident fund, stationery and telephone expenses of the factories, consumable stores, and all those expenses comes under your factory or production or manufacturing overheads. Now the next one is the office overheads. So what are these office or administrative overheads? This consists of all indirect expenditure incurred in the direction, control, and the administration of an undertaking which is not directly related to the research and development, or not related to selling and distribution. So we have the office rent, office lighting, heating, salaries and wages of clerks, officers, salaries and wages of accountants, repairs of office building, insurance, depreciation of office building, office furniture, printing and machinery, audit fees, legal expenses, etc. The third one is the selling overheads. So these are the indirect expenditure incurred in promoting the sales as well as retaining the customers. Now the salesman's salary, commission, then window display expenses, sales office expenses, showroom expenses, postage of sales department, repair, insurance, depreciation, all those things. Now comes the distribution overheads. So it comprises all indirect expenditure incurred from the time the product is ready in the work until it reaches its final destination, that is until it reaches the customers. So the warehouse charges, storage expenses, packing, shipping, carriage outwards, depreciation, repairs and maintenance, the postage and stationery of distribution office, insurance of finished stock, salary of distribution, salary of the driver who is involved in the distribution, all these comes under the distribution overheads. So based on function, the overheads can be classified into factory overheads, office overheads, selling overheads and distribution overheads. Next, the classification of overheads on the basis of nature or elements. Now the classification of overheads done according to the nature and the source of expenditure are the indirect materials, indirect labor and the indirect expenses. Indirect materials. Indirect materials refers to those materials which do not normally form part of the finished product. So these are actually the materials which cannot be allocated, but it can be apportioned to the cost centers or cost units. So now for example, the stores items used like lubricants, cotton waste, cement and things like that, which are used, which cannot be directly allocated to a particular cost center, we call it as indirect materials. We have indirect labor, the wages paid to labor or workers who are employed other than on the production. So those who are directly involved in manufacturing, we take it as direct labor. So those employees who are employed in activities other than the production, we included in the indirect labor. And also we have indirect expenses, are those expenses other than indirect material and indirect labor which cannot be allocated but which can be apportioned or absorbed by the cost centers. Now for example, the insurance or canteen expenses, power, all these items comes under your indirect expenses. So on the basis of the nature or elements, the overheads can be classified into indirect materials, indirect labor and the indirect expenses. Now on the basis of behavior of the cost, we know that we can classify the cost into fixed cost, variable cost and semi-variable cost. Similarly, the overheads can be classified into fixed overheads, variable overheads and semi-variable overheads. So what are these fixed overheads? Fixed overheads are the expenses which remain fixed in total amount with increase or decrease in the volume of output or a productive activity for a given period of time. So fixed overhead cost per unit increases as production decreases and it decreases as the production increases. Now the rent and insurance, the depreciation of plant and machinery, depreciation of building, salaries of the managers, etc. they are fixed overheads. And then the variable overheads. What are variable overheads? These are the overheads which vary in total in direct proportion to the volume of output. What does it mean? It means that as the production increases, the variable overheads also increases, and as the production decreases, the variable overheads decreases. Then we have another item that is semi-variable. So there are certain overhead items which are neither completely fixed nor it is variable. So we call it as semi-variable. That is, up to a certain volume of production they are fixed, and after that particular volume of production it changes. For example, Now, if you are working up to a certain capacity, the salary for the supervisor may be at a certain rate. If it is beyond that capacity, the salary of the supervisor will change. So, similarly, now as I have given you the early example of the electricity charges. Electricity charges for up to a level will be will be fixed, and afterwards it will change as per the consumption. So now we have different bases of classification which we have seen, that is the classification based on function, classification based on nature or elements, and the classification based on behavior. Now once we have classified the overheads, these overheads are given a code, that is codification of overheads is being done. Now we'll see what is this code. Codification is the procedure of allotting a particular name, number or symbol so that each group may be distinguished from another one. So what is being done is a particular name or number or a symbol is being given so that that expenses can be distinguished from one another. There are different methods being used in order to codify the overheads. So we have this numerical method wherein numbers are being given. So overheads are codified using the numbers. For example, now if you have repairs, we give it a number as 1, lighting is 2, so power is 3, depreciation of building is 4. So instead of writing as repairs, what we write is 1. Now instead of writing lighting, we write it as 2. So numbers are given. So the best example is your register number. The register number for your university, you get a number based on the year when you have joined the course, and then other details relating to the college. It can be used to identify all these aspects. Now second method which is used is the alphabetic method. Here English alphabets are used to codify the overheads. For example, instead of writing repairs, the code given is R, and instead of writing depreciation, we use it alphabet D. So whenever R is mentioned, it means it is repairs. Whenever D is mentioned, it is depreciation. Whenever L is mentioned, it means it is lighting. So English alphabets are being given to codify the overheads. And the third one is, it's a combination of both numerical and alphabetic method, that is alphanumerical method. So it is a combined method for that matter, combination of alphabets and numbers. Now for example, we give the number repairs as 1, and the service department canteen as C. Now if you write C1, which means that it is the repair charges of canteen department. Now you can relate it with your subject code. So you have your BCM CMC 521 or BCM CMC 325. That is, you have your code of the subject combining the course code as well as the number which is being used in order to identify the subject, that is alphanumerical code. And then we have the decimal method, wherein we use decimals in order to identify the different overheads. For example, 201.1, which means the salary. 201 means salary, and 0.1 we use salary expenses of salesman grade 1. 201.2 means salary expenses of salesman grade 2. 201.3, imagine there are different grades of salesmen. So 201.1 is salary expenses of salesman grade 1. 201.2 is the salary expenses of salesman grade 2. 201.3 is the salary expenses of salesman grade 3. Similarly it goes on. So the different methods used for codification of overheads are the numerical method, alphabetical method, alphanumerical method, and the decimal method. Now once we have classified as well as codified the overheads, the next important task is the departmentalization, which is nothing but the allocation and apportionment of the overheads. So before we go for departmentalization, we need to understand the concept of production departments and the service department. So we have this production department where the goods which are actually manufactured, or the production activities are being done, and the activities are directly connected with the production of the articles. And we have service departments. Service departments are not directly engaged in production. What is their task? They render services for the benefit of production and other department. For example, we have stores department. Stores department do not produce anything, but without stores department, the production departments cannot survive. We have timekeeping department, we have canteen, we have repairs and maintenance department, we have purchase department, we have transportation department, we have personnel department. So these are the service departments which render services to the production department. Then there are production departments whose main activity is manufacturing the products, and they receive the services from these service department. Now departmentalization, what is being done is the overheads are distributed among the various production as well as the service department on some suitable basis. Now for example, we have to distribute the rent expense. Now how do we distribute? We will find out the floor area of all the production departments and as well as the service department, and then it will be distributed among the production as well as service department on the basis of the floor area occupied. If the production departments require more area, then production departments the rent will be more rent will be charged to this production department and less rent will be charged to the service department. So based on some basis which is being used, the rent will be charged to production as service department. Similarly, all other overheads will be charged to various departments based on a suitable basis. So that is called as the departmentalization, which is nothing but the distribution of overhead expenses among the production and service departments on some suitable basis to determine the departmental cost. And so what we do here is the allocation. We call it as the allocation and apportionment of overheads. We see what it is. Allocation is the process of charging full amount of items of cost to a cost center. It is the identification of overhead with a particular cost center, department or a process to which it relates. Now for example, in an organization there is one production department and one service department, and the production department carries on the manufacturing activities and the service department is the timekeeping department which provides service to the manufacturing department. And now there is an expense of power. In that case, the power is being used only by the production department. So the full power charges, the expenses incurred on power is distributed or given to the production department only. That is known as allocation. So allocation is the process of charging full amount of items of cost to cost center. So power expenses 10,000, it is fully charged to the production department and it is not charged to the service department, because service department does not require the power for its activities. And there are certain expenses which cannot be fully charged. So what we do is we apportion it. So it is called as apportionment of overheads. We will see what it is. Apportionment of overheads is the allotment of proportion of items of cost to cost centers. So here it is the process of dividing an item of overhead and charging it to different departments on appropriate basis. Now for example, similarly in the same organization wherein one production department as well as one service department is there, we have expenses on lighting. So in that cases, lighting charges has to be divided or distributed among the production department and the service department on the basis of the number of light points. Now imagine the expenses 10,000 rupees and the number of light points in the factory are 7 and the number of light points in the service department is 3. On the basis of the number of light points, that is 7:3 ratio, 10,000 will be divided. That is 10,000 into 7 divided by 10, that is 7,000 rupees will be allocated, will be distributed to the production department, and the remaining 3,000, 10,000 into 3 by 10 will be distributed to the service department. That is known as apportionment. So apportionment of overheads is the allotment of proportion of items of cost to cost centers. So what is it is the process of dividing an item of overhead and charging it to different departments on appropriate basis. Now as I have given you the example of lighting. Now the allocation is actually the process of charging the whole items, whereas apportionment is the process of dividing and distributing it to the various departments. So how do we apportion? That is a question which arises. So usually there are different methods used, that is based on benefits received or ability to pay method and all. Now once we do this, that now we have distributed it to both production as well as the service department. As I have already mentioned, the service department do not produce anything, they provide services. So whatever overheads charged to the service department has to be reapportioned to the production department. So we call this as the secondary distribution of the overheads. So the overhead cost charged to the service department should be redistributed to the production departments on some suitable basis, which is known as secondary distribution of overheads. So in this session, that is our second chapter actually, in second chapter we will be dealing with the reapportionment of service department cost to the production department. There are different methods used in order to reapportion. We will study it in detail in our second chapter. Once reapportionment is done, the next step is the absorption of the overheads. Now what happens is, first the overheads are allocated as well as apportioned to both production and service department. Then that is known as the primary distribution. Then afterwards we have the secondary distribution, where the service department overheads are again charged to production department. Now only production departments have the overheads, and these overheads will be absorbed by the products manufactured or the jobs undertaken or the number of units produced. So we have to find out the per unit cost of output. So this is known as absorption. So absorption is the charging the departmental overheads to individual products or jobs. That is known as absorption. What is that? It is the total cost of the production department is to be absorbed by all the products manufactured or jobs undertaken or the units of output produced. Now for example, if you have different production department A, B, C and all, if A department has 10,000 rupees total overhead and the number of units manufactured has to be found out, and it has to be divided by the number of units in order to find out per unit cost of output. So 10,000 divided by number of units will give us the per unit cost of output. That is known as the absorption of the overheads. So once the primary distribution is over, then comes the secondary distribution, then comes the absorption of the overheads, where the departmental overheads are charged to individual products or jobs. That is known as absorption of the overheads. So our first chapter is the primary distribution, which is the allocation and apportionment of overheads. Our second chapter is the secondary distribution of overheads, which is the reapportionment of service department cost to the production department. And our third chapter is the absorption of overheads. Herein we will study the different methods which are being used in order to absorb the overheads to the units produced or the cost centers. Thank you.